In the fall of 2003, I traveled to southern Poland with a German camerawoman and a Polish translator to find a small castle. We had a 70-year-old map, and I knew about where the castle was, but not exactly. And you can see some of the clips of us asking people where the castle is. You'll also see that cows have the right-of-way in southern Poland. It was a stressful, strange, and necessary journey that ultimately spawned an hour-long documentary that ran on national PBS and was seen by almost 1 million viewers. How did I get there? Let me start at the beginning. I grew up on the far southeast side of Chicago, down near the steel mills and auto plants that used to populate that area. My mother, Florence, was a school teacher, and my father, Rudy, was an accountant and an IRS agent. We always had boxers as well. We loved our dogs. I had a mostly happy childhood, but there was a darkness in the house. My father would regularly shout and scream in his sleep, which would jolt me awake, my heart pounding. It was the Holocaust. Rudy was a German Jew who grew up in a 750-year-old city called Königsberg in a middle-class home. With the rise of the Nazis, my father and his brother left Germany in 1939. His parents, my grandparents, Bruno and Minna, were not able to get out, and they were murdered by the Nazis in 1941. This is the last picture I have of them. It was on a postcard that they sent to Rudy a few months before they were pulled from their home, marched to a distant town, and then shot. The Holocaust was an inescapable part of my childhood, and it felt like a weight of horror, darkness, and victimization that was part of my life, part of my legacy. Many years passed, and my passion for photography became a passion for filmmaking, and I got an MFA in film directing from Northwestern in 1992. After graduating, I began producing independent feature films in Chicago, which was my dream. Life was looking up when my father died in 1996. My mother had passed long before that, so his death hit me particularly hard. Rudy was a tough guy who had been brutalized by his childhood experiences, but he was a sweet man as well, who had built me a darkroom at home when I was a teenager. It was in the weeks after his death that I thought about his life and just what it had taken for him to come to the U.S., serve in the Army during World War II, move to Chicago, meet my mom, and raise a family. My father had a photo album of his childhood and teenage years, and it reminded me about a chapter in his life in Germany that I had always heard about but never really focused on. The story was about a school that my father attended in Germany, a special place that would teach German Jewish teenagers farming and manual trade skills so that they could emigrate to another country and escape the Nazis. During the day, they would farm, and at night, they would put on plays and perform classical music. It was a remarkable place. It was called Grossbrazen, which was the name of the town where it was located in what was then southeastern Germany. The school and the dormitories were in an old castle. This was my moment of creative impulse, the moment that I saw a story that had to be told. This was a story that I had not heard about the Holocaust. It was a tale of the Jewish community being proactive and working to give the next generation a new life in a new country, and not just being victims, but taking action several years before the violence and the horror of the Holocaust. My first step was to attend a reunion of the former students in upstate New York in 1999, and it was like walking into a family reunion for me. all of these older people looked like, talked like, and thought like my father. I went there to interview them thinking I might write a script about the Gross Brazen story, but I realized by the end of the weekend that I was already making a documentary. I came back to Chicago and started editing the film. I had never made a documentary, and I had just had a baby with my wife. And I just started teaching film at Columbia College Chicago. So it took me a while, but in 2003, I realized I had to go to Gross Brazen, which, due to the changes in the borders after World War II, was now in Poland. I didn't know why exactly, but there was something deep inside of me that told me I could only understand the experiences of these 150 teenagers, the experiences of my father, if I stood where they had been in 1936. So I assembled my crew, which was my friend and former student Carolina, a Columbia College alumna, who was German and living in Berlin, and she had a friend Magda, who was a Polish national, who also lived in Berlin, who spoke Polish and German, so she could be our translator. I was reasonably fluent in German, so we were set and ready to go. We rented a car in Berlin and took off eastward, off to Poland. I knew about where the town was, but finding the castle was different. The names had changed, and the internet was still very basic at that point, so we were really running on hope. We headed off on a road trip to Poland, hoping to find the castle. All I had was this photo album, which I carried like a talisman. As we went, I tried to figure out what we were doing and what had driven me to enlist these two young women to help me. Carolina videotaped everything, even as we kept hitting dead ends. Somehow we found the right person who pointed us in the right direction, and we found it. We got there at a very fortunate time when it was in the midst of being renovated to be a home for a wealthy Polish entrepreneur. We were able to walk around the building before all of its original charm was gone. The architect was on site, and he was pretty astounded when this ragtag group of an American Jewish filmmaker, German camerawoman, and a Polish translator showed up at his door with a photo album of what the building looked like in the 1930s. I returned to Chicago with all of the new footage, and it quickly became clear that the road trip would be the story element that would connect everything. The Gross Brazen students and their story, my father's story specifically, and my journey to upstate New York, Germany, and Poland. Stones from the Soil, as it was called, was completed in 2004, and it aired on national PBS, which was remarkable since it was my first documentary. I even got to be interviewed on WTTW here in Chicago, the local PBS station, by Bob Surratt, another Columbia College alum. It was my first time on live TV. And I was pretty nervous. The initial impact of Stones from the Soil was considerable. It played on hundreds of PBS stations, and I showed it at a number of colleges and universities. It is now in the collection of the U.S. Holocaust Museum and the Jewish Museum in Berlin. My original goal of telling the story of Gross Brazen was to change the perspective of the viewers regarding the fate of the German Jewish community, and to show that they were not just victims, but also proactive, taking action that saved the lives of the children, even if many of the adults of that generation did not escape. However, the story evolved as I worked on it, and it ultimately became much more focused on memory, personal memory, genetic memory, and the importance of not forgetting history. Additionally, when I screened it for college students, I saw how the story had an impact on them that went beyond the history. They connected it to their own families' histories and their own memories of their childhood and how they wanted to tell those stories as well. And that changed how I viewed my own work, and it changed how I teach my film classes. I now tell my students that the best stories are not the fantastic tales of heroes, monsters, and sci-fi extravaganzas, though I love those movies. The most compelling tales are those that come from the world that's closest to you, from your family to your block to your neighborhood to your city. The more personal you are, the more universal your stories are. Some of these narratives are not happy, but they are all important to tell, both because the history needs to be preserved, but also because other people will relate to your stories. Because they have families too who have had struggles, tragedies, and voyages from other countries, but found a new life with new families and a new home. Personal stories tell universal truths and are an essential part of world history. The best illustration of this is that my father's photo album is now at the Jewish Museum in Berlin in their collection. It will be preserved there, and it will still be there hundreds of years from now to tell this important story about life in Germany in the early 20th century and what daily life was like for the Jewish community at that time, and what was lost. The phrase you hear about the Holocaust is never again. That is, of course, essential. But for me, the impact of telling these type of stories is never forget. Not just for the Holocaust, but for all of our stories, your family stories, and all of the personal journeys. They are compelling, they are dramatic, funny, and engaging. So tell these stories so that we never forget. Thank you.